So he was born in 1929, but what was more interesting is that he was the seventh child. Before him, the mother lost 6 children, and so she named him Gudina with the hope that he would grow. Gudina means growth.
When he was 10 years old, he had a wish to go to school because education was introduced by the Swedish mission around Boji. So he was interested in their teachings, and that's how his wish to go to school and also learn the good news developed.
After accepting the gospel of Jesus Christ, Gudina's family were traditional believers, so he felt that they needed to know this new truth that he had found out, and they had a ritual worship tree, and at the age of 10 he went and he cut down that tree as he viewed it as an idol, a symbol of that was against his new belief, and this forced persecution upon him in his home, and he had to leave there later on.
So his wish to go to school was fulfilled when he found a man called Nagasa Faisa, who directed him to go to the next town, which is Najo, where the missionaries were. He went there and he started attending mission school, and there he grew deep in his Christian life, and that's where he was getting academic education in elementary school, as well as knowledge of the Word of God.
He spent a short time in Najo, and later on he had to leave Najo and go to the city. Well, it's a city, Nakamte. That was a very large city for him, especially as a young boy. And when he went there, he faced a lot of challenges, severe hunger, harsh labor conditions, and because he didn't have anyone to support him, he had to stop his education at the 8th grade, but he studied any chance that he got on his own. One story that shows his hunger during that time period is whenever he would get hungry because he couldn't find food as he desired, he would lick salt and drink a lot of water in order to feel full.
After his arrival in Nagamte, he started working for different people, and then during these services he injured himself and his knee, and he went to the hospital, the only hospital at that time built by the Swedish missionaries. And there the doctors found out that he was proficient in English. So they offered him to work as a translator at the hospital for the foreign doctors.
So while in Nakamte, he met his future wife, Tsai Tolesa, a very beautiful, beautiful girl, as he liked to describe her. And so there, he proposed to her. After they got engaged, so many different things happened. He lost his parents. He had to go and bring his younger siblings to raise them. Then he got married to Tsai Tolesa. And so the Swedish missionaries arranged their marriage, and they got married. And together they started raising his siblings, Baro, Nagasa, and Gudina Tumsa, the 3 of them. 2 boys and 1 girl. Yeah.
After their marriage in 1951, Emmanuel, their eldest son, was born in 1952. But both of them were working, and Tsahai and Gudina were working, and he was attended by somebody else who was living with them. Emmanuel, a toddler at that time, started chewing the roasted corns, and he got stuck in his lungs. He was treated in Nagamten, and they couldn't help him much, and they traveled to Addis Ababa at that time, and they operated him, but then he couldn't actually overlive the injury and the operation, and he died.
First of all, when Emmanuel was born, Tsai had promised the Lord that he would be a minister and serve in the house of the Lord. And to her, losing Emmanuel meant that promise was a dead end in some sense. After they returned to Nakamte and buried Emmanuel, they had another daughter, Kulani, which was of course a blessing for them after the rough experience that they had. But in 1955, I believe you were 1 year old at that time, Gudina was offered a promotion at the hospital to continue in the medical field. He was already a dresser, an advanced dresser, somewhat of a nurse. But I remembered her promise to the Lord that a male in her household would serve him in his house. And so as he was presented with the opportunity to continue in the medical field, she presented him with the opportunity to pursue a new field in ministership or pastoralship. And after much prayer and fasting together, Gudina and her made the decision to leave the medical field and go to pursue the calling of God.
Gudina was a very zealous man, a young man at the time, and he was in the church and the first indigenous pastors. Before them, there were missionary pastors from Sweden. And after that, he started working there, and he's a man who pursued the truth, and the truth mattered to him. So there was a case there where a church elder was involved in a polygamous relationship, and he couldn't keep that to himself. So what he did is, along a missionary pastor, he said, this man should be reprimanded, we should be disciplined for his deeds, that it was not right and that he shouldn't be serving as an elder. Then at the time, the man was very influential, his family was very influential, and most of the congregation sided with the man, and Gudina was left alone with the missionary pastor. And I read that the missionary pastor had to be sent home back to Sweden, whereas Gudina was sent to Kambata, Hadia region as a form of discipline, but also to serve the people there.
After he arrived in Kambata, he continued with his mission. But then he had a problem with the food, and everything changed, and also his health. Then Tsahai, our mother, left us behind and went to join him and also serve him in his mission. He was alone there, but she joined him for the 2 to 3 years he served in Kambata.
While in Kambata, Gudina proved to be an exceptional minister. Some people from Kambata refer to him as their St. Paul, others as their Billy Graham. And this led to Gudina getting an offer from Dr. Schaefer, an American missionary. The opportunity was for Gudina to go and continue his theological studies in the United States.
Yeah, so when he was given the opportunity to go to the United States and pursue a degree in theology, the first thing was that he didn't have the credential. He didn't qualify because he never attended high school. But the man who met him there, Dr. Schaefer, believed in his abilities, and he strongly recommended him, and the church agreed. But Gudina was very hesitant because he felt like, 5 children, our mother was alone, and he felt he shouldn't leave her. He should stay there and, raise the children with her and minister in his hometown. But then, after some prayer, mother decided that he should go and pursue his education. And so he decided to go, and he left in 1963 and attended school until 66, and he was very successful.
Actually, while he was in the US, and the 60s was a time of a big change within the US. There was the Black Rights Movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King, and that also influenced him, actually, his outlook very much. But also the writings of Niebuhr, the German theologian and philosopher. These are what we call today the liberation theology influenced his outlook very much.
Gudina returned to Ethiopia after his 3-year education in the United States, influenced, like you said, by many different people like Martin Luther King and so on. When he returned, Gudina was about to return to Nakamte and minister there as he did before. But much to a lot of our surprises when we read his story, the man who was disciplined in Kambata was offered the second highest position in the EECMY, the Ethiopian Evangelical Messianic Church, as their general secretary. Although he wasn't very eager for this position, after much consultation with his wife and prayer, they came to the conclusion that it was God's will. And after much petition from the ECMY leadership, they came to that conclusion. And Gudina began his leadership in the ECMY, where he contributed a lot of things to the church, such as the things he's written about unbelief, the socialism seminars that he prepared after the 1974 revolution, which after 1974 I think is his most crucial years in leadership of the church. Mm-hmm. As I was saying, after 1974, it was the most crucial period for Gudina's leadership in the ECMY, as during the revolution, Ethiopia went from an imperial system to a socialist system, and socialism brought a lot of, I will say, problems to Ethiopia. For example, in 1976, Mengistu Haile Mariam officially became the sole leader of the government, and he announced the Red Terror, which was a devastating time in Ethiopian history, as over 500,000 people and many unknown were either disappeared or were killed. And this became crucial in the church as Gudina began to prepare the church, equip the church for the persecution that was coming, as religious persecution is synonymous with communism and Marxism. So he began to prepare the church for that.
Just before that, in 1974, when the first 60 people were murdered, many people were afraid, even moving out of their houses or even going or any talking. People were shocked. This was for the first time actually openly done in the country. So people appealed to him to say something. And then he had a series of preachers, texts he wrote at that time. Don't be afraid. So he actually, these sermons were transmitted in the voice of the gospel at that time. And people really listened to him and thanked him because they had this hope that everything will be okay. Even if people are killed beside you, but still God has better plans for the humanity. And so this is where he really started saying this country needs actually a new way, a right way. And so the church has to also speak out on behalf of the people. And, yeah. In sometime in the rainy season of 1976, a crisis happened in the family. The family lost one of the sons, Latera, who was 16 years old, and he died after a very short pain or illness. So it was now a major crisis for my parents, Gudina and Sahai, but also for the whole family. And but he again showed strength for the family, but also for the friends. He preached on the burial ceremony of his son, saying now that he has taken the right road back home.
So affliction and tribulation on the family started with Latera's death. After that, it was intensified, I could say. In 1978, in October, he was arrested for the first time officially, and he was taken into the 3rd police station, and he was kept there for more than a month, and then he was in very unbearable conditions. The prison condition was very bad.
In Arsi.
After that, he was taken to Arsi. We don't know why he was taken there. Outside of Asella, it was a very, very cold area. And my mother had to go there and live with him. And she stayed in one of the local hotels. I went and visited her over the weekend. I was going to school. And she was staying in one of the local hotels, but she said it was full of rats. So she had to move out of that hotel, and there was no hotel in that area. And she had a small car, and she lived in the car. And she cooked outside and took food to where he was being held in jail. After that, they brought him back to Addis and kept him for a while, and then he was released. And the second time, he was arrested in 1979 in May, and he was kept there for about 5 or 6 weeks. And then he was released again through international pressure. And the release story is very, very interesting. He was kept there without any charges, and that's when I was arrested with him, but I was released earlier. After 3 weeks, I was released. Then finally, Lutheran World Federation put a lot of pressure on the Ethiopian government. The pressure didn't work as much, but Christian Krause went and spoke with Bishop Kibira of Tanzania, and then they created a connection with President Nyerere. And President Nyerere flew into Addis with his private jet, and he had matters to attend in Khartoum as well. And so on his way back from Khartoum, he landed at Bole Airport, and from there, he negotiated with Mengistu Haile Mariam his release, and Mengistu said, if he leaves the country, then we will allow him to be released. So Nyerere promised that he will take him to Tanzania for a short time. After that, to elsewhere in Europe. So this arrangement was made, and Christian Krause came from Germany, and that night he was sick, and my mother and I had to go there at night. But then one of the cadres, they called them in those days, he came and he said, "Gudina, you can go home." And then he said, "Why are you releasing me now? What about all the documents you showed me that you had evidence against me?" And then he said, "You can go home." And the man left, and we took him, and then we went to the German church, which is located in Sidiskilo. And there Christian Krause was waiting. And then Christian Krause took him to the next room and told him the arrangements, because they have made all the arrangements that night, not to go home and spend the night, but to go to the private jet of President Nyerere, and along his wife and child. I was the only child remaining at home. So he was made that offer, but he declined it. He said, I cannot leave my church, I cannot leave my people. How can I do that? And so that's how we returned home. A month after he was released and he refused to leave the country, he was kidnapped off of the streets of Addis and he was killed.
That was July 28th, 1979. After they separated him from my mother, they took him to, I think, his last place. That was what was known as Ras Casa's house. And there he kept him until late evening. And then that evening, that night, Mengistu and the high officials of the government were celebrating, and they were drinking whiskey and talking on the first floor. Just from the first floor, one can look down onto the ground floor. And this ground floor had 8 doors. Within each 8 door, there were people trained in martial arts, and they were also, they came from each door and put my father in the middle and actually exercised their arts on him. Because of his height, because of his huge bones and body, I mean, for them it was an entertainment, like the gladiator of the Romans. So they were enjoying from the first floor, and then from 8 sides he couldn't bear it.
His wife was, of course, shocked. That night she was in the car with him. They took her to the outskirts of the city and she had to beg for money to get back home because they took her purse and everything. After returning home, she didn't want to believe he was dead, as any wife doesn't want to believe their husband has died, even if they see it with their own eyes. So for 6 months, Sahaya, a very active woman, a woman who loved to work, a woman who loved to go outside, became idle and was sitting in her home waiting every day, hoping that Gudina would return. And one day everything would go back to normal. Mm-hmm. And then so you were there with her as well that time. But he never returned. 6 months later, security forces took her and arrested her. She was taken, I believe, to the third prison, Makalawi. And from there, I believe they took her to the palace grounds, the old palace.
For torture.
And she was tortured. That was her first torture. And she was never charged. There was no charges. She was just arrested and tortured, simply because she was the wife of Gudina Tumsa. And after she was arrested for 10 years, the first 13 months was in a dungeon. She was tortured on multiple occasions, horrible torture. After she came out on the 10th year, she eventually left the country and went to her children. And Lensa, who had also left the country, found out, and I believe you were also in Germany at the time. She was in the United States. And you had your first son, which was, of course, a sign of joy for a family who was experiencing nothing but sadness since their fourth brother, Latera, had passed. There was really nothing to be happy about. It was a new sign of joy for the family because it wasn't death now, it was birth, it was life. And when they came to visit you in Germany, Gudina's brother, Gudina Tumsa, his middle brother, called and he said that I found Gudina's body, and as it's been said, it was televised, the finding of his body. Like you said, he was a large man, 2 meters. He was buried, found in the palace grounds, the Rasasrati house. I mean, of course, as a family, it was was melancholy at that time. You were celebrating this new life, at the same time losing one that was so important to all of you. That's how, I guess, eventually you guys just had to accept that it was over. There was nothing you could do about it. But at least there was some closure now. It wasn't just an open book. And Gudina's body was found that way. And all of you returned home in 1992. And you had a reburial ceremony. And that wasn't the conclusion to Gudina's legacy, but that was the conclusion to his life.
Yeah. So even though he had a very sad ending and he was murdered brutally, his legacy continued. And Gudina Tumsa Foundation was established in his memory. And many people benefited from that. And I think that's the path he chose. He wanted his vision to continue. He wanted to be here. He could have escaped. He was offered a job in Geneva in the Lutheran World Federation headquarters, as Reverend Paul Hoffman told us. But he declined that request. He had very many opportunities, but yet he declined because he lived for the gospel and he wanted to die for the cause of the gospel. So he became a martyr. But his legacy still continues, and the legacy inspires many people, and many young people, theologians are still inspired by him here in Ethiopia as well as overseas. So when we remember Gudina, we remember him for what he did and for his faith in Christ and what he left behind. So we don't remember him with sadness and the brutalities committed against him. No, we remember him for the life he lived and for his contributions.
I want to thank the oldest and the youngest daughter of Gudina Tumsa, ironically. Wasn't planned this way. But I want to thank you guys for taking time with us and sharing your father's life story. A life story that is touching to us and will be touching to many, we believe. We want to thank you for that.
Well, Kolu, thank you for this opportunity. This is a very important issue, and it is important to us. It is also important to many more people, and thank you.
Also, thank you as the youngest member of the family. But also Lensa and Aste and everybody for actually carrying on through the foundation. But I also thank thousands of people throughout the world who are really involved in researching, writing about him and inquiring. So I am glad we could share what his life looked like with other people.